The roar of the small motorboat faded as I watched the last of the fish flop in the shallow, muddy puddles where my private lake used to be. A triumphant, chilling smile crept onto my face. Karen's fishing derby was over. Her face, usually a mask of HOA-fueled self-importance, was a picture of pure, unadulterated horror as she stared at the rapidly shrinking body of water. Little Timmy, who had been so excited about catching his first fish, was now openly weeping beside his tiny fishing rod, gazing at the struggling fish with wide, tear-filled eyes. I saw the questions forming in everyone's minds, their shocked expressions mirroring the chaos on the barren lakebed. How did this happen? Why would anyone do such a thing? The answer, of course, was Karen. This was her fault. Every last bit of it. Life in the Willow Creek estates was supposed to be a dream. That's what the glossy brochures promised: manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a sense of community that wrapped around you like a warm blanket. For a while, it truly felt that way. My wife, Sarah, and I had poured our life savings and countless hours of sweat equity into our home, a charming house nestled on a sprawling plot of land. The crown jewel of our property, the feature that truly sold us, was the shimmering, pristine lake that bordered our backyard. It wasn't just a pond. It was a substantial body of water, stocked with bass and catfish, a haven for local wildlife, and our personal slice of paradise. We spent countless evenings on our dock, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, the gentle lapping of the water a soothing soundtrack to our lives. Our neighbors, for the most part, were wonderful. There was old Mr. Henderson, who always offered a friendly wave and a story about his time in the Navy. Across the street lived the Millers, a young couple with a baby, who often brought over freshly baked cookies. We even hosted a few neighborhood barbecues, sharing the beauty of our lake with friends and new acquaintances, always making sure to emphasize that while we loved sharing, the lake was, unequivocally, private property. We had a large, clear sign by the path leading to the water, stating, "Private property, no trespassing." Everyone understood. Everyone, that is, except for one person. Karen. Karen moved into the estates about a year after us, occupying the largest house on the block, a veritable mansion with more columns than a Greek temple. From the moment she arrived, a subtle shift occurred in the neighborhood's formerly harmonious rhythm. She quickly appointed herself the unofficial mayor of Willow Creek, despite having no actual authority. Her car, a gleaming black SUV, became a familiar sight, cruising slowly through the streets, presumably on patrol. We initially tried to be welcoming. Sarah even baked her a welcome pie, a delicious apple crisp, which Karen accepted with a perfunctory nod and a muttered, smells, homie." The first sign of trouble, a mere whisper of the storm to come, arrived in the form of a brightly colored flyer slipped under our door. It was an invitation, or rather, a summons, to the inaugural meeting of the Willow Creek Estates Beautification Committee, spearheaded, of course, by Karen. The agenda included discussions on uniform mailbox designs, approved garden gnome heights, and, chillingly, community access to natural amenities. I remember scoffing at the time. Natural amenities? I chuckled to Sarah. Is she going to start charging us for breathing the air? We decided to attend, hoping to politely convey that our lake was not, in fact, a community amenity. The meeting was a disaster. Karen, perched at the head of a long table in the community clubhouse, presided over the gathering with an iron fist. Her pronouncements were met with nervous nods and hushed agreements. When the topic of natural amenities arose, she launched into a monologue about the importance of shared spaces, her gaze pointedly lingering on me. "It's simply unneighborly," she declared, her voice dripping with passive aggression, "to hoard such a magnificent resource. A lake, especially, should be enjoyed by all." I politely raised my hand, and when she finally deigned to acknowledge me, I explained, as calmly as possible, that our lake was part of our private property, clearly marked, and not intended for public use. Karen's face tightened. But think of the children, she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. Think of the joy they could have, fishing and boating. A few sympathetic murmurs rippled through the room. I reiterated my point, stressing that we had purchased the property specifically for its privacy and the lake. The meeting ended with a strained silence. Karen's eyes narrowed in what I now recognize as pure, unadulterated resentment. The next few weeks were a series of escalating annoyances. We'd find small pieces of litter near the edge of our property by the lake path, things that clearly didn't blow in naturally. A stray soda can here, a crumpled candy wrapper there. Then came the accidental trespassers. Children, always children, sometimes accompanied by their parents, would wander onto our property, drawn by the allure of the lake. We'd gently remind them it was private, and most people apologized profusely, pulling their kids back. But a few, notably those who had attended Karen's meeting, would offer a defiant stare or a mumbled, "Karen said it was okay to look." It became clear that Karen was actively encouraging, or at least implying, that our lake was fair game. One afternoon, I saw a drone, clearly not ours, hovering over the lake, recording. I immediately called the HOA president, a mild-mannered man named George, who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by Karen's relentless energy. He promised to look into it but sounded weary, as if he'd had this conversation many times before. The drone never returned, but the feeling of being watched, of our privacy being chipped away, lingered. Then came the first direct confrontation, a true moment of Karen-ness that solidified her place as the neighborhood antagonist. I was out on our dock, enjoying the afternoon sun, when I saw a family of 4, complete with fishing rods and a cooler, stride purposefully down our marked private path towards the lake. My heart sank. I stood up, walked to the edge of the dock, and called out, "Excuse me. This is private property. You can't fish here." The father, a large man with a red baseball cap, scowled. Karen said it was okay. She said it was for the community. My patience, already thin, began to fray. Karen doesn't own this property. I do. And it's private. He scoffed, casting his line into the water with a defiant splash. What's the big deal? It's just a lake. Just a lake. My lake. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. The big deal is that you're trespassing. Please leave now. The man's wife stepped forward, her arms crossed. We're just trying to have some fun. You're being very inhospitable. It was then that Karen herself appeared, emerging from the tree line like a suburban phantom, a smug smirk plastered on her face. "Is there a problem here?" she purred, feigning innocence. "Just explaining to these lovely people," I replied, my voice taut, "that they are on my private property and need to leave." Karen tooted. "Oh, do be reasonable, David. It's such a lovely day. And the children." She gestured dramatically to 2 bewildered-looking kids holding small fishing nets. "They just want to enjoy nature." "Nature on my land," I retorted, "which is clearly marked as private." This escalated quickly, with Karen accusing me of being selfish and unneighborly, and me standing my ground. The family, sensing the tension, eventually packed up their gear and left, muttering under their breath about crazy homeowners. Karen lingered, her eyes blazing with indignation. "You haven't heard the last of this, David," she declared, her voice a low, menacing hiss. I simply stared back, refusing to be intimidated. I knew then that this wasn't just about a lake anymore. This was a battle for boundaries, for respect, and for the simple right to enjoy our own property in peace. The subtle annoyances had morphed into outright aggression. Karen had made it personal. What I didn't know then, couldn't possibly have imagined, was just how personal she was prepared to make it, or the extreme lengths to which I would go to reclaim my peace. The tipping point, the event that would push me from frustrated homeowner to vengeful lake drainer, was just around the corner, waiting to erupt like a dormant volcano. Karen's threat hung in the air, a dark cloud promising an inevitable downpour. We tried to ignore it, to focus on the peaceful moments the lake still offered, but an underlying tension now permeated our days. Sarah, ever the optimist, suggested we host a small, intimate gathering by the lake, inviting only our closest, most trusted neighbors, Mr. Henderson, the Millers, and a few others who had always respected our boundaries. "It'll remind us," she said, "that there are good people here, and our home is still our sanctuary." The evening was beautiful, filled with laughter, good food, and the soft strumming of a guitar. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a sense of calm settled over us. It was a brief respite, a moment of peace before the storm. The storm, when it finally arrived, came in the form of official-looking letters from the HOA. Not just one, but a series of them, each one more ridiculous than the last. The first letter, delivered by hand by Karen herself, who stood on our porch with a triumphant smirk, was a notice of a violation. Our violation, according to the meticulously typed document, was improper maintenance of a natural water feature, leading to excessive algae growth and potential mosquito breeding grounds. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read it. Our lake was pristine, its ecosystem perfectly balanced. We regularly cleared any minor debris and maintained the natural flora around its edges. This was a blatant fabrication, a flimsy excuse for harassment. I immediately called George, the HOA president. He sounded apologetic, almost defeated. "David, I know it's not fair," he sighed, "but Karen, she's relentless. She presented evidence, blurry photos, honestly, at the last board meeting. There wasn't much I could do." He advised us to contest it, which we did, providing detailed photos and even a letter from a local environmental consultant vouching for the lake's health. The violation was eventually dropped, but the experience left a sour taste. It wasn't about the algae. It was about control. Next came the noise complaint. This one was particularly baffling. We were accused of excessive noise from water-related activities disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. This was after our quiet evening gathering. Our guests were considerate, and the music was soft. Karen, apparently, had a very sensitive ear, or perhaps, a very active imagination. This complaint, too, was eventually dismissed, but the pattern was clear. Karen was systematically trying to find any pretext, no matter how absurd, to cause us trouble. She was trying to make our lives miserable, to chip away at our enjoyment of our own home, all because we wouldn't bend to her will regarding the lake. We began to feel like we were living under a microscope, constantly scrutinizing our every action, worried about what trumped-up charge Karen would invent next. It was exhausting, a constant low hum of anxiety in the background of our lives. The tension reached a new peak when we received a formal request from the HOA board, undoubtedly instigated by Karen, for an environmental survey of our lake. This wasn't a friendly suggestion, it was worded with legalistic precision, implying that if we refused, there could be further implications for compliance with community standards. The stated purpose was to assess the ecological impact of a large private water feature within a residential community and ensure its harmonious integration with the surrounding environment. This was a thinly veiled attempt to gain access to our property, to find something, anything, they could use against us. Sarah was furious. "They want to invade our privacy, David. This is beyond ridiculous." I agreed. We consulted with our lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Jenkins. She advised us to refuse the survey, citing our rights as private property owners. "They have no legal standing to demand this, David," she assured us. "This is harassment, plain and simple." We sent a strongly worded letter back to the HOA, drafted by Ms. Jenkins, unequivocally denying their request and reminding them of our legal rights. For a brief period, the letters stopped. The constant, nagging feeling of being watched lessened. We dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Karen had finally given up. That hope was short-lived, shattering into a million pieces on a bright Saturday morning. I woke to the distinct sound of children's excited shouts and unfamiliar adult voices echoing from the direction of our lake. My heart immediately sank. It was too early for any of our usual friendly neighbors to be out there, and the volume suggested more than just a casual visit. I rushed to the window overlooking the lake, my blood running cold at the sight that greeted me. Our tranquil, private oasis had been transformed into a bustling public park. There were dozens of people, many of whom I didn't recognize, setting up folding chairs, coolers, and umbrellas along the shoreline. Children, armed with fishing rods, were already casting lines into the water. A large, garish banner, flapping defiantly in the morning breeze, proclaimed Willow Creek Estates Annual Fishing Derby, hosted by the HOA. And there, right in the thick of it, directing people with an imperious wave of her hand, was Karen, a wide, self-satisfied grin plastered across her face. My rage boiled over, hot and visceral. She hadn't just trespassed, she had organized a full-blown event on my private property. She had invited an entire community to invade my sanctuary. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accidental trespass. This was a deliberate, calculated act of defiance, a public humiliation. She had crossed a line so far beyond what was acceptable that it felt like an act of war. Sarah, hearing my gasp, came to the window, her eyes widening in disbelief and then narrowing in fury. She actually did it, she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. The noise grew louder, the laughter more boisterous, each sound a direct assault on our peace. I could see Karen, her head held high, clearly basking in her perceived victory. A family was even setting up a small barbecue pit dangerously close to the edge of the lake, smoke already beginning to curl into the crisp morning air. The sheer audacity of it, the blatant disregard for our rights, was staggering. My mind raced, grappling with the immediacy of the invasion. This was no longer about letters or complaints. This was a physical occupation, a direct challenge. And it was happening right now, on my land. My initial shock quickly morphed into a cold, steely resolve. Sarah, seeing the fury in my eyes, placed a calming hand on my arm. David, she said, her voice strained but firm, we need to be smart about this. Don't just rush out there. She was right. A head-on confrontation with dozens of people, many of them neighbors who genuinely believed they were invited by the HOA, would only make us look like the bad guys. This was Karen's game, and she had clearly planned it to put us in an impossible position. We had to respond in a way that exposed her deception without alienating everyone else. I took a few deep breaths, trying to quell the tremor in my hands. My mind raced, trying to find a solution that was both effective and within the bounds of what I could legally do. Our property was clearly marked, the boundaries well defined. They were trespassing, plain and simple. But asking them to leave, especially with Karen stirring the pot, felt like trying to stop a tidal wave with a teacup. I watched Karen moving among the crowd, her posture radiating self-importance as she accepted compliments and directed people to prime fishing spots on my land. She even had a small table set up with HOA fishing derby, sign-up sheets and a bowl of candy for the kids. It was a carnival on my private property, and she was the ringmaster. I quickly grabbed my phone and started recording. I panned across the lively scene, capturing the banner, the crowds, the fishing lines in the water, and most importantly, Karen holding court. This was evidence, undeniable proof of her brazen invasion. Then, I called the local sheriff's department. I explained the situation calmly, making sure to emphasize that a large event, a fishing derby, was being held on my private property without my permission, organized by the HOA. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, probably used to petty neighborhood squabbles. "Sir, are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding with your HOA?" she asked. "No, ma'am," I replied, my voice firm. "It's a deliberate act of trespass on a large scale. They have a banner, sign-up sheets, and dozens of people. My property is clearly marked as private. She promised to send an officer, but emphasized it might take a while, as they were short-staffed. While we waited, Sarah and I watched from our window, a silent movie of disbelief playing out before us. We saw old Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, walk hesitantly towards Karen, gesturing towards our house, clearly trying to intercede or at least question her. Karen waved him off dismissively, her smile never faltering, then turned her attention back to someone else. It hurt to see neighbors, people we had genuinely liked, unknowingly participating in this invasion. But their ignorance was Karen's weapon. She had spun a narrative, undoubtedly telling them that the lake was a shared community resource, or that we had given permission. We knew the truth, and now we needed to make everyone else see it. About 45 minutes later, a sheriff's patrol car slowly pulled up to the curb near our property. Officer Miller, a young, earnest-looking man, emerged, looking somewhat bewildered by the scene. I met him at the edge of our driveway, the sounds of the derby a jarring backdrop to our conversation. I showed him my property deeds, the clear, private property signs, and the video I had taken. Officer Miller listened attentively, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to growing concern. "So, the HOA organized this on your land, without your consent?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "That's exactly right, officer," I confirmed. "They've been harassing us for months, trying to claim this lake as community property, despite all evidence to the contrary." He nodded, then began to walk slowly towards the lake, his uniform a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere. As he approached, Karen spotted him. Her triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance, then bewilderment, and finally, a flash of pure panic. She hurried towards him, her usual air of authority giving way to a forced cheerfulness. "Officer! What a pleasant surprise! Just enjoying our annual community fishing derby," she chirped, trying to wave him away as if he were just another curious onlooker. Officer Miller, however, was not so easily deterred. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm here because of a complaint regarding a large gathering on private property without the owner's permission." He gestured towards me, standing a little distance away. Karen's face paled slightly. "Private property? Oh, no, officer, this is a community amenity. The HOA maintains it, we have rules." She launched into a rambling explanation, trying to twist the facts, to assert her fabricated authority. But Officer Miller had already seen the property lines, the signs, and had heard my side of the story. He cut her off politely. "Ma'am, the owner of this property, Mr. Johnson, has provided clear documentation that this land, including the lake, is private. Unless you have a written agreement with him stating otherwise, this event constitutes trespass." A ripple of murmuring went through the crowd as people began to realize something was amiss. The festive mood began to deflate, replaced by an awkward silence. Karen, regaining some of her composure, drew herself up to her full height. "This is preposterous. Mr. Johnson is being completely unreasonable. He's ruining everyone's fun," she shrieked, pointing dramatically at me. Officer Miller, however, was unmoved. "Ma'am, my job is to uphold the law. You need to disperse this gathering immediately. If people refuse to leave, they will be subject to trespassing charges." He looked around at the bewildered faces in the crowd. "Everyone," he announced, raising his voice slightly so it carried across the now much quieter lakefront, "this is private property. You are being asked to leave. Please pack up your belongings and exit the premises immediately." The scene became a flurry of activity, but not the joyous kind. People began to gather their fishing gear, fold up chairs, and retrieve coolers, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. Some shot angry glances at me, others at Karen, clearly unsure whom to blame. Karen, however, was not defeated. As people started to slowly pack up, she began to move through the crowd, whispering urgently to individuals, her voice low but intense. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see the expressions on people's faces as they listened to her: confusion, then a flicker of understanding, and sometimes, a renewed defiance. A few families, after listening to her, stopped packing and began to look around hesitantly. A sense of unease, a new kind of tension, settled over the lake. Officer Miller, observing Karen's continued agitation, narrowed his eyes, clearly sensing that this was far from over. He knew, and I knew, that Karen was already planning her next move, whispering new instructions, planting seeds of doubt and resentment. This forced dispersal was merely a temporary victory. The real fight, the one that would determine the ultimate fate of the lake, was yet to come. Her next move, whatever it was, I knew would be a direct challenge, and the stakes would be higher than ever before. The sheriff's visit had cleared the immediate threat, but Karen's whispered words had planted a new kind of unrest among the exiting crowd. As people grudgingly packed up, I overheard snippets of conversation: "He's so selfish, just wanted to enjoy the day," and "Karen said he agreed at first." It was a cunning tactic, twisting the narrative to make us seem like the villains. Officer Miller, sensing the lingering tension and Karen's refusal to back down, pulled me aside. "Mr. Johnson," he said quietly, "this isn't just about a fishing derby, is it? She seems to have a real axe to grind." I nodded, explaining Karen's relentless attempts to claim our private lake. He advised me to consider a restraining order if her harassment continued. "Document everything," he stressed, "every incident, every letter, every interaction. It'll build your case." With a final, stern warning to Karen, who still stood defiantly, arms crossed, Officer Miller departed, leaving a simmering pot of resentment in his wake. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Too quiet. It felt like the calm before a hurricane. We braced ourselves for the next volley of HOA letters or another accidental trespasser, but nothing came. This silence was more unnerving than the overt attacks. It was clear Karen was plotting, devising a new strategy that wouldn't involve a direct confrontation with the law. Sarah and I spent our evenings on the dock, not in peaceful enjoyment, but in watchful anticipation, scanning the tree line, listening for any suspicious sounds. The joy we once derived from the lake was now tinged with anxiety. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a battleground. One afternoon, a few weeks after the fishing derby debacle, I noticed something peculiar. The water level in our lake seemed lower. It was subtle at first, just a few inches, but enough to make the exposed muddy banks along the shoreline more noticeable. I dismissed it as my imagination, or perhaps a natural fluctuation due to less rain. But over the next few days, the drop became undeniable. The dock, which usually floated gently, now seemed to sit a little higher out of the water. Rocks that were once submerged were now peeking out, glistening in the sun. Panic began to set in. Our lake was fed by an underground spring and rainfall, a closed system that rarely saw significant changes in level unless there was an extreme drought, which we hadn't had. This was unnatural. I spent hours walking the perimeter of the lake, searching for any signs of a leak or a breach in its natural basin. I found nothing obvious. The land was firm, no visible sinkholes or erosion. I checked the small, natural overflow drain we had to prevent flooding during heavy rains. It was completely dry. This deepening mystery only amplified my growing unease. I contacted a local hydrological expert, a kind, elderly man named Dr. Finch, who specialized in natural water systems. He agreed to come out and assess the situation. When he arrived, he walked the shoreline, took water samples, and even brought a sonar device to scan the lakebed. After a thorough investigation, he shook his head, a puzzled expression on his face. "David," he said, "your lake is losing water, rapidly, and I can't find any natural explanation for it. No leaks, no excessive evaporation, no geological shifts. It's almost as if it's being drained intentionally." The word hit me like a physical blow, drained. Intentionally. Who would do such a thing? And how? The only person with motive, the only person with such malicious intent, was Karen. But how could she be draining a private lake? It seemed impossible, like something out of a wild story. I tried to dismiss the thought, to rationalize it, but the chilling possibility began to take root in my mind. Dr. Finch explained that a large-scale pump, properly concealed, could potentially do it, especially if it was drawing water from an outlet that wasn't immediately visible, perhaps further down the natural water flow system, or even connected to a deep well. He suggested I investigate any unusual construction or excavation activity on nearby properties, especially those close to the natural runoff path of the lake. His words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I remembered seeing a large delivery of unusual piping at Karen's house a few weeks ago, dismissed at the time as some elaborate new landscaping project. I also recalled her property extending quite a distance behind her mansion, bordering a dense wooded area that led towards a larger, public creek. Could she have installed a secret pump, siphoning water from our lake into that creek? The idea was so audacious, so utterly vindictive, that it almost seemed too far-fetched. Yet, given her past behavior, it was exactly the kind of extreme measure she might take. The next few days were a blur of frantic reconnaissance. I discreetly patrolled the edges of our property, venturing into the wooded areas that bordered Karen's land, searching for any sign of hidden pipes or unusual equipment. Sarah helped, keeping a lookout from our attic window with binoculars, noting any suspicious activity on Karen's property. We felt like secret agents, consumed by this clandestine war. Then, late one evening, as dusk settled over the estates, I saw it. Tucked away in a dense thicket of bushes on the very edge of Karen's sprawling backyard, near where her property met the public creek, was a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It was barely audible over the chirping crickets, but it was there. And then, a glint of metal, barely visible in the fading light, a large, dark-colored pipe, expertly camouflaged, snaking out from the bushes and disappearing into the creek bed. My heart pounded in my chest. There it was. The proof. The insidious, calculated act of sabotage. She was draining my lake. The audacity, the sheer evil of it, took my breath away. All those weeks of subtle harassment, the fabricated complaints, the invasion of the fishing derby, they were all leading to this. This was her ultimate victory, her way of destroying the very thing that made our property special, the very thing she coveted and couldn't have. My mind raced, envisioning the beautiful, vibrant ecosystem of the lake slowly dying, becoming a barren mud pit. The fish, the birds, the peace, all gone, stolen by her malice. A cold fury, unlike anything I had ever felt, washed over me. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to stop her. But how? The thought of confronting her directly, of trying to dismantle her hidden pump, seemed futile. She had planned this meticulously. No, this required something more, something that would not only stop her but also make a statement, a final, undeniable act that would demonstrate the true cost of her relentless aggression. I stood there in the deepening twilight, staring at the hidden pipe, a dangerous idea slowly forming in my mind, an extreme solution to an extreme problem. It was risky, perhaps even reckless, but it was the only way to truly end her reign of terror and reclaim our peace. The sight of that hidden pipe, subtly siphoning away our lake's lifeblood, solidified a terrifying but unavoidable truth: Karen had to be stopped, and a conventional approach wouldn't be enough. Legal battles would drag on, while our lake continued to shrink. Confrontation was useless. This called for a decisive, irreversible action, a move so bold it would not only end her scheme but also serve as a stark, undeniable consequence for her relentless malice. I walked back to the house, the dangerous idea fully formed in my mind. Sarah met me at the door, her face etched with worry. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, my expression grim. "I found her pump." She's draining the lake. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Draining it? How could she? Her voice was a mix of shock and disbelief. I explained about the hidden pipe, the quiet hum, and my suspicion that it was pumping water into the public creek. She's trying to destroy it, I stated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She wants to make sure no one can enjoy it, especially us. Sarah sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping. What do we do, David? We can't just let her get away with this. We won't, I vowed, my voice firm. But we have to be smart. We can't just turn off her pump, even if we could find it easily in the dark. She'd just restart it or find another way. This has to be permanent. A grim silence filled the room as I outlined my audacious plan. Sarah listened, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and a dawning understanding. It was extreme, yes, but Karen's actions had pushed us to the brink. She had stolen our peace, invaded our privacy, and was now actively destroying our property. Desperate times, I reasoned, called for desperate measures. The plan was simple in its core idea, but terrifying in its execution. If Karen wanted to drain the lake, I would help her. But I wouldn't just let her slowly drain it to her own nefarious ends. I would take control of the process, and when she least expected it, I would unleash a torrent. I would drain the lake myself, completely, and in one swift, shocking move. Not her controlled trickle, but a deluge that would end her fishing derby dreams forever. It was a risky gamble, fraught with potential legal repercussions, but the thought of our beautiful lake turning into a stagnant puddle at Karen's leisure was unbearable. This had to be decisive. The next few days were a blur of intense research and covert preparations. I spent hours online, studying schematics of lake drainage systems, learning about siphons, and calculating flow rates. I needed a way to accelerate the drainage, to empty the lake rapidly without directly interfering with Karen's hidden pump, which I feared she would be monitoring. My focus shifted to the natural lay of the land, the subtle slope that led from our lake towards the larger creek. There had to be a weak point, a natural channel that could be exploited. I recalled Dr. Finch mentioning the possibility of a breach in the natural basin, even if he couldn't find one. What if I created one? Not a slow leak, but a controlled, rapid release. I acquired the necessary equipment piece by piece, making purchases from different stores in neighboring towns to avoid suspicion. Large, heavy-duty drainage hoses, a powerful, quiet submersible pump that could handle significant water volume, and discrete tools for digging and concealment. Each trip was a nervous affair, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Sarah was my silent partner, covering for me, distracting anyone who might notice my odd activities. She even helped me map out the best route through the dense underbrush to the furthest, most secluded point of the lake, where the bank sloped most dramatically towards the creek. This point was far from our house and, crucially, far from Karen's prying eyes. The biggest challenge was the sheer scale of the task. Draining a lake, even a medium-sized one like ours, was a monumental undertaking. It required precision and power. The submersible pump was key. It was far more powerful than whatever small mechanism Karen was likely using. My goal was not to just empty the lake, but to do so with a dramatic, undeniable flair. I needed to ensure that when the fishing derby happened, the lake would be a mere muddy memory. One moonless night, under the cover of darkness, I began the arduous work. Armed with shovels and the submersible pump, I navigated the treacherous, overgrown path to the chosen point on the lake's edge. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I worked silently, meticulously, digging a deep trench from the lake's edge, carefully angling it to create a new, accelerated drainage channel towards the creek. It was back-breaking labor, but the thought of Karen's smug face at the imagined success of her derby fueled my resolve. I installed the powerful submersible pump at the bottom of the trench, securing the massive drainage hose, and extending it discreetly through the dense underbrush, all the way to the bank of the public creek, where it would simply blend in with the natural runoff. I camouflaged the pump and the exposed trench with branches and leaves, making sure it was virtually undetectable to a casual observer. It was an engineering feat born of pure spite. The moment of truth arrived a few days later when I saw the familiar, brightly colored HOA fishing derby banner being unfurled on my property again. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Karen had learned nothing from the sheriff's visit. This time, she was even bolder, having sent out official-looking invitations with the HOA logo, making it seem even more legitimate to unsuspecting neighbors. I knew this was my one shot. I waited until the morning of the derby, until I heard the first excited shouts of children, the first splash of a fishing line. I watched from my window as Karen, beaming, welcomed families onto our land, directing them towards the lake, already significantly lower than usual thanks to her hidden pump's constant, slow drain. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment I would reclaim our peace, but also the moment I would cross a line, pushing back with an force as extreme as Karen's own. I slipped out of the house and made my way silently to the hidden trench. The air was filled with the sounds of the derby, laughter, chatter, the occasional splash. I found the camouflaged switch. With a silent prayer and a surge of cold determination, I flipped it. The powerful pump hummed to life, a low, guttural growl that was immediately swallowed by the ambient noise of the gathering. And then, the water began to move. Not a gentle trickle, but a powerful, surging torrent, emptying our lake at an astonishing, frightening rate. From my vantage point, I could already see the water level beginning to drop visibly, far faster than it had been. The stage was set. The trap was sprung. The fishing derby was about to become an unforgettable, devastating spectacle, and Karen was utterly oblivious. The submersible pump hummed with a fierce, relentless energy, a hidden monster devouring our lake. From my concealed position, I watched with bated breath as the water level plummeted with shocking speed. The festive chatter on the shoreline began to die down, replaced by confused whispers and then, increasingly, outright exclamations of disbelief. Children, who had been gleefully casting their lines moments before, now pointed with wide eyes at the rapidly expanding muddy banks. Fish, suddenly exposed, flopped desperately in shrinking puddles. The joyous shouts of the derby turned into gasps of horror. Then, someone screamed. A high-pitched, guttural sound that cut through the air. It was Karen. She stood at the edge of what was moments ago the vibrant shoreline, now a vast expanse of oozing mud. Her face, usually so composed in its self-important mask, was contorted in a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water, as she stared at the vanishing lake. Her meticulously planned fishing derby, her grand public display of dominance, was dissolving before her very eyes, literally draining away into nothing. Chaos erupted. Parents frantically pulled their children back from the exposed mud, worried about the struggling fish and the sudden, alien landscape. The vibrant banner, flapping forlornly, mocked the scene of ecological collapse. Little Timmy, the boy who had been so excited to catch his first fish, stood frozen, his fishing rod dangling uselessly, tears streaming down his face as he watched the bass and catfish gasping for air in the dwindling water. His mother, a kind woman named Brenda, rushed to him, her own face pale with concern, trying to comfort her sobbing son. Karen, however, was past comforting. Her initial shock quickly transformed into incandescent rage. She began to shriek, her voice raw and shrill. "What is happening? What is this? My derby! My beautiful derby!" She looked around wildly, her eyes landing on me as I emerged from the tree-line, walking calmly towards the chaos. Her gaze narrowed, filled with a sudden, dawning horror. "You! You did this, didn't you, David? She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You ruined everything. I stopped a few feet from the edge of the rapidly receding water, looking out at the stunned faces of the neighbors, then back at Karen. My voice was calm, almost eerily so, in contrast to her hysteria. Yes, Karen, I stated, my gaze unflinching. I did. You wanted the lake drained for your community amenity, so I simply expedited the process. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Some people looked at me with open mouths, others with a mix of shock and grudging admiration. They finally saw the true face of the neighborly HOA leader and the lengths to which her obsession had pushed me. Karen lunged forward, her face contorted in a snarl. You lunatic. You destroyed a natural resource. I'll sue you. I'll have you thrown in jail, she screamed, her voice cracking with indignation. But before she could reach me, Brenda, Timmy's mother, stepped in front of her. Karen, stop it. Brenda cried, her voice trembling but firm. Look what you've done. This poor boy is heartbroken. You invited everyone here, on private property, and now this is happening because of your spite. Brenda's words seemed to pierce through Karen's rage, momentarily. The crowd, now fully aware of the deception, began to turn their collective gaze from the dying lake to Karen. Whispers started, louder this time, filled with anger and betrayal. She said it was okay, someone muttered. She lied to us, another added. Karen, seeing the tide of public opinion turning against her, visibly faltered. Her eyes darted nervously between the angry faces in the crowd and the rapidly vanishing lake, then back to me. The power she had wielded, the illusion of authority she had carefully constructed, was crumbling around her. As the last vestiges of water swirled down the trench and disappeared into the hidden pipe, leaving behind a vast, shimmering expanse of mud and struggling fish, a few resourceful neighbors, led by Brenda, sprang into action. They grabbed buckets and anything they could find, rushing into the mud to rescue the stranded fish, trying to move them towards the public creek or deeper puddles. It was a poignant scene of impromptu kindness amidst the wreckage, a stark contrast to Karen's destructive ego. Karen, seeing her grand scheme unraveling, seeing her neighbors actively trying to undo the damage her actions had caused, suddenly looked small, pathetic even. The grand, imposing figure of the HOA mayor had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered woman. She stumbled back, her face slack with defeat, her eyes wide with a dawning realization of the magnitude of what had just happened, and the part she played in it. The sheriff's sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Someone, undoubtedly an alarmed neighbor, had called them. This time, I had nothing to hide. The evidence of the drained lake was undeniable, a monument to a battle fought and won. As Officer Miller stepped out of his patrol car, his eyes widened at the scene, taking in the mud, the forlorn banner, the frantic neighbors, and Karen, standing defeated amidst the ruin. He looked at me, then at Karen, and shook his head slowly. The case was self-evident. The story of the drained lake became a legend in Willow Creek Estates, a cautionary tale about unchecked power and the lengths to which one man would go to protect his home. Karen faced a barrage of legal action, fines from the Environmental Protection Agency for illegal drainage, lawsuits from the HOA board for misrepresentation and property damage, and even a few small claim suits from neighbors who had ruined their fishing gear in the mud or demanded refunds for the derby. Her reign of terror was over. She eventually sold her mansion at a significant loss and moved away, a pariah in the community she had tried so hard to control. Our lake eventually refilled, slowly but surely, nourished by the spring and the rains, its ecosystem gradually healing. We spent months restoring the shoreline, replanting native grasses, and allowing nature to reclaim its balance. It was a long process, but with each returning bird and each glimpse of a fish swimming in the clear water, we felt a profound sense of peace. The private property signs stood stronger than ever, and no one, not a single soul, dared to cross them again. The lake was once again our sanctuary, a testament to resilience, and a stark reminder that even the most extreme actions can sometimes be necessary to protect what truly matters. We learned that kindness and empathy were indeed vital, but so too was the courage to stand up for oneself, to draw a line in the sand, or, in our case, drain a lake, when pushed to the absolute breaking point.